It was already running late. Daniel Whitmore stepped through the front door of his estate at precisely 8:47 in the morning, adjusting his cufflinks with one hand, holding his phone and car keys in the other. His mind was already at the airport. Already in the meeting. Already on the next call after that. The flight was at 10. The car would take 40 minutes in normal traffic. He had exactly enough time, if nothing slowed him down. That was the formula his life ran on. Exact enough time, if nothing went wrong. He had lived inside that formula for 20 years. It had never failed him. He had not looked at the driveway. He had not looked at the gate. He had not looked at anything, except his watch. That was when the small hand caught his sleeve. "Stay quiet," she said. "Follow me." He looked down. Standing beside the stone doorstep was a girl, no taller than his elbow, dark-skinned, maybe 9 or 10 years old, wearing a plain cotton dress and holding a pencil in her free hand, like she had just stepped away from something she was drawing. She was the gardener's daughter. He had seen her before, in that distant, half-attentive way a busy man notices people who exist quietly on the edges of his life. She was always there. Always watching. Always holding that notebook. He had never heard her speak before. "Excuse me," he said. "Please, sir." Her voice was low. Steady. Completely without panic. "Come with me. Don't let them see you." "See me? Who?" He pulled his arm back slightly. "I'm late. I have a flight." She did not let go. Her grip, for a small hand, was surprisingly firm. "Sir," she said. "Please. Just come." Something in the way she said it stopped him. Not fair. She was not afraid. That was what struck him, even then, in those first confused seconds. She was not trembling. She was not running. She was calm, in the way that children are sometimes calm when they know something very heavy, and have decided to carry it anyway. He followed her. She led him off the stone walkway, across the gravel, toward the row of large decorative flower pots that stood between the hedge line and the open view of the front gate. She crouched down behind the nearest pot. And tugged his sleeve gently downward. He hesitated. The gravel pressed through the knees of his trousers. He thought, briefly, about how absurd this was. Daniel Whitmore. 47 years old. Founder of one of the largest real estate firms in the country. Crouching behind a flower pot. In his own driveway. He crouched anyway. From between the pot and the hedge, he could see the front gate clearly. The black sedan was there, engine running. The driver stood beside the rear door, waiting. Daniel studied the man for a moment. "That's my driver," he said quietly. "He's been with me for 3 years." "No," she said. "He is not." "What do you mean, he's not?" "Of course he is." She shook her head, very slightly. "Your driver always opens the door with his right hand. He keeps his key fob in his left pocket, always. I see him every week." She paused. "That man opened the door with his left hand. And the license plate is different. One number. Not the same." Daniel looked again. More carefully this time. The car was identical. Same model, same color, same small scratch on the front bumper he had never bothered to have repaired. But the plate, he had to focus, had to pull his attention from the familiarity of the vehicle itself and force it onto the numbers, and there it was. 1 digit. Out of place. Why would he have noticed? It was his car, it was always his car. How do you know his right hand? Daniel asked. "I notice things," she said simply. "When you work in a garden, you notice things." He was about to stand up. He was about to tell himself this was some misunderstanding, some staffing change no one had remembered to mention, some clerical error in the scheduling. He had built his entire adult life on systems. On processes. untrusting the architecture around him to function while he focused on the thing at the top. That architecture had never failed him. Not in 20 years. It was about to do what he always did, trust the system, and move forward without stopping. Then she spoke again. Yesterday, she said quietly, I was standing near the trees, watching my father work. Near the glass house. The greenhouse. She looked at him steadily. I heard your wife talking with a man. They were inside. They couldn't see me. It went very still. They said the driver would be changed. They said you would not notice, because you are always in a hurry. She looked down for a moment, then back up. They said when you get in the car, he will not take you to the airport. Daniel did not speak. They said he will take you somewhere far. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere no one can hear. She reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a phone, small and old, the kind with a cracked screen. They said they already paid him. Her thumb hovered over the screen. I recorded them. At that exact moment, Daniel's phone rang. He looked at the screen. Elizabeth. He answered. Daniel, where are you? His wife's voice came through, warm, slightly impatient, the way it always sounded when she thought he was running behind schedule. The driver said you haven't come out yet. You're going to miss your flight. I'm coming, he said. His voice was steady. He was surprised by how steady it was. 2 minutes. Well, Harry. We talked about this meeting for weeks. I know, he said. I'm on my way. He ended the call. He stood up slowly from behind the flower pots, brushing the dust from his trousers. He looked at the gate. He looked at the car. He looked at the driver standing beside it, still waiting, still patient. I have to go, he said. I can't run a company from behind a flower pot. She grabbed his hand again. Both hands this time, wrapping around his fingers with a grip that made him stop mid-step. Sir, she said. If I am wrong, you can be angry at me. My father can lose his job. We can leave. She looked up at him and finished the sentence without flinching. But if I am right, and you get in that car, you will not come back. The garden was very quiet. In the distance, a bird moved through the top branches of one of the tall oaks near the fence. The engine of the black sedan idled softly at the gate. Daniel Whitmore exhaled slowly. Tell me exactly what you heard, he said. She told him. Her voice never wavered. She described standing near the trees the afternoon before, pencil in hand, notebook half open. While her father trimmed the hedges 20 meters away. She had heard the greenhouse door creak. Dim voices. A woman's voice, smooth and measured. A man's voice, practical, come in the way of someone running through a checklist. Once he is in the car, he will not be at the airport. The driver knows where to take him. The place is ready. No cameras. No neighbors. He stays there. No phone. No food. Until he understands, he is not coming back. And when he is declared missing, the insurance goes to you. Daniel stood very still while she spoke. He was holding his phone loosely in his hand, not looking at anything in particular, just staring at the middle distance, the way a man does when something heavy is settling into the space where certainty used to live. She said something else, the girl continued. At the end. She seemed to understand that this part mattered. Her voice was different. Quieter. She said. He gave him 15 years. 15 years of my life. If I leave with nothing. I am not leaving with nothing. Daniel closed his eyes. Used for a second. Then he said, you said you recorded them. Did they see you? No, I was outside. They were inside. He stayed in the trees. Whose phone is that? My father's. Does he know what's on it? She shook her head. I didn't tell him. He was afraid, if I was wrong, he would lose everything. "I was afraid, if I was right, the wrong people would hear before you did." I looked at her then. Really looked at her. A girl who had been carrying something that would have made a grown man's knees buckle, and she had held it quietly, alone, overnight, and then walked out of the grass and taken the sleeve of a billionaire and told him the truth. "You did the right thing," he said. "You came to me first." She nodded once. Like that had always been the plan. "Come with me," he said. Quickly. "And stay low." She moved along the hedgeland beside him, steady and silent, like a child who had spent her whole life learning how to be invisible when she needed to be. They stopped behind a tall row of bushes near the greenhouse. From there, Daniel could see the stone path that ran from the back of the main house to the greenhouse door. The path was quiet. Then it was not. Two figures appeared from the far end of the house, walking slowly. A woman in a light-colored dress, her hand resting gently on the arm of a man Daniel had never seen before. They moved the way people move when they believe no one is watching. Comfortable. Unurried. They stopped at the greenhouse door. The man said something low. Daniel could not hear it from that distance. But Elizabeth laughed. A soft, private laugh. The kind that belongs only to people who have stopped pretending in front of each other. Then she reached up, touched the man's face with her fingertips, and kissed him. Daniel Whitmore did not move. He did not breathe. He stood behind the bushes, his hand still half raised from where he had been about to check his watch, and he watched his wife press her forehead against another man's and say, loudly enough this time for the garden to carry the words, "Just a little longer. When this is over, we won't have to hide anymore. A pause. I love you." The silence after those words was very long. The girl beside him said nothing. She didn't need to. She had known from the beginning why she had told him to stay quiet. She had known what he would see if he followed. He stood there long after the two figures separated and walked in opposite directions. Elizabeth moved back toward the house, slow and elegant, exactly as she looked at every charity dinner, every board event, every photograph. The man walked the other way, hands in his pockets, unurried. When they were both out of sight, Daniel finally exhaled. His voice, when he spoke, was different. Not louder. Not harder. Used older. "The recording," he said. "Can I hear it again?" She handed him the phone without a word. The second time he listened, he was not in shock. It was building something. The recording began with wind through leaves. Then the creak of the greenhouse door. Then her voice, smooth and managerial, "Once he gets in the car, it's done. It won't be at the airport. By the time anyone realizes, he'll already be gone." Then the man's voice, "The driver knows where to take him. The place is ready. No cameras. No neighbors. No phone. No food. Until he understands he's not coming back." Then Elizabeth again, quieter, "And the insurance? You're the beneficiary. When he's declared missing, the money comes to you. You just have to wait." A short silence. Then her voice, turned to something cold he had never heard in 15 years of marriage. "I gave him 15 years. If I leave, I leave with nothing. I am not leaving with nothing." Daniel pressed the stop. He held the phone in his hand and looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at the girl. "How much of that did you understand?" he asked. "Not every word," she said. "But I understood they were going to take you somewhere and not let you come back. And I understood they talked about money if you disappeared." He nodded slowly. "You saved my life," he said. She looked at the ground. "I just told you what I heard. That's the part that matters," he said. He walked back into his house like a man entering a building he had never been inside before. Everything was the same. The marble floors. The tall windows. The quiet, expensive furniture that existed to be looked at, rather than lived in. But he noticed something now that he had never noticed, something that had probably always been there, how completely silent the house was. Not peacefully silent. Not restfully silent. Empty silent. The silence of a place where two people had been living parallel lives for years, without once asking whether the other was still there. He closed his office door. He sat behind his desk but did not open his computer. He sat with his hands flat on the desk and stared at nothing. After a long time, he picked up his phone and called Martin Hale. Martin had been his corporate attorney and closest friend for 11 years. He answered on the second ring, voice easy. You're supposed to be in the air right now. Don't tell me you finally took a day off. I need a favor, Daniel said. And I need you to listen carefully. Martin went quiet. He recognized that tone. That was not the tone of a man talking about contracts. I'm listening, he said. Find out everything about my wife's insurance policies. Life insurance. Beneficiaries. Dates. Any. Recent changes. I love it. A pause. And tell me something. If a husband disappears, not confirmed dead, just missing, can the insurance still be paid? The silence on Martin's end was very specific. The silence of a man recalibrating. Yes, Martin said slowly. But it takes time. A court has to declare the person legally dead after a defined period. Then, Daniel. Why are you asking me this? Because I think someone is planning for me to disappear. I did not go to the police that day. It was not cowardice. It was precision. I understood, in the cold way of a man who had negotiated against difficult people for 20 years, that moving too early would give everything away. If he called the police that morning, Elizabeth would say he was paranoid. She would say overwork had made him see conspiracies. She knew exactly how to talk to people who had power, how to soften them, how to redirect them, how to make concern sound like hysteria. She had learned it by watching him do it for 15 years. He needed evidence that could not be argued with. He also needed time. Time to understand the full shape of what he was dealing with, not just the piece shown to him by a child in a garden, but the whole architecture of it. How long it had been planned. Who had designed it? Where the money went. Which signatures on which documents had been obtained without his knowledge. Martin called back that evening with the first piece. The life insurance policy in Daniel's name had been updated 6 months ago. The coverage had been increased significantly. The primary beneficiary was Elizabeth. The paperwork had come through his own office, clean and official, signed during a trip to Chicago when Daniel had been reviewing a stack of documents in a hotel room while simultaneously managing 3 phone calls. He had trusted the papers were what his assistant said they were. He had not read them closely. He signed a lot of things. So many things. The man's name, Martin told him on the second day, was Ryan Keller. No significant criminal record. But a great deal of debt. Failed investments. Loans he could not pay. Exactly the kind of man who might agree to something terrible if someone offered him a way out. Sometimes, Martin said, it's not just money. Sometimes it's resentment. Money is just a tool. Daniel sat on the back patio in the early morning and thought about resentment. He thought about dinners alone. He thought about the years of next year will be better, and next year never arriving. He thought about a woman who had watched her husband build an empire from a distance, who had smiled for photographs at charity events and slept in a large, quiet house on the nights when he was in Chicago, or Dallas, or London, or Singapore. He thought about the schedule. His entire life had run on a schedule. Flights and meetings, calls and conferences, charity events and board sessions. Every hour of every day was known in advance by someone. Confirmed by someone. Printed on calendars. Shared with assistants, drivers, event coordinators. If someone wanted to know where he would be at any given moment, all they had to do was look at his calendar. And the person who had known his schedule better than anyone, for 15 years, was his wife. It did not excuse what she had done. But he was beginning, very slowly, to understand how it had happened. That afternoon, he walked out to the garden. The gardener was repairing a section of the fence, replacing a broken post with the patient care of a man who had learned that small damage becomes large damage if you give it time. If you don't fix it early, the gardener said, noticing Daniel watching, the whole fence becomes weak. Then one day it all falls down at the same time. Daniel was quiet for a moment. I think that's what happened to my life, he said. I didn't notice the small breaks. The gardener kept working. It did not ask questions. It was the kind of man who understood that some conversations only needed one person talking. Nearby, the girl sat on the low stone wall with her notebook. She was drawing the front gate, the driveway, the car, the flower pots. Every detail, in careful pencil lines. So you remember? Danielle asked, looking over her shoulder. Yes, she said. So I remember. I watched her draw for a moment. Can you draw the man you saw with my wife? She looked up. Talked about it, then nodded. She turned to a fresh page and began, slowly and carefully, sketching the shape of the face, the hair, the way the man had stood with both hands in his pockets like he had nowhere specific to be. Line by line, the drawing emerged. Daniel watched it appear and felt something strange and very particular. The most important information in his life right now was being produced by a child with a pencil, sitting on a garden wall, in a plain cotton dress. The dinner that evening was a performance. Elizabeth had lit candles. The table was set precisely. From the outside, looking in through the tall windows, they would have appeared to be exactly what they had always appeared to be. A successful couple. A quiet, elegant evening. Undisturbed. She smiled when he sat down. You're home early. I live here, he said. I should be home more often. They ate in polite silence. She asked about the rescheduled Chicago meeting. He gave a short answer. She mentioned a charity function next week. He said he would try to attend. At some point during the second course, he looked at her across the table, at the woman he had spent half his adult life beside, and understood something that was both very simple and very final. He did not know this person. Maybe he had not known her for a long time. Maybe neither of them had really known the other. Maybe that was precisely the problem. A house full of routines and schedules and beautiful furniture, and underneath all of it, two people living completely separate lives, and calling it a marriage. Elizabeth, he said quietly. Do you ever feel like we became strangers, while living in the same house? She looked up, surprised. That's a strange thing to say at dinner. Is it strange, he asked. Or is it true? She picked up her wine glass and took a slow sip. She did not answer. And Daniel Whitmore realized that the most dangerous negotiation of his life was not happening in a boardroom. It was happening here, across a candlelit dinner table, with a woman who had a plan, and believed he did not. The trap was set on a Monday morning. Daniel came downstairs at the same time he always did before a flight. Suit. Pressed. Tie straight. Briefcase in hand. Elizabeth was already in the kitchen. She handed him coffee like she always did. He said Chicago, just one day, back tomorrow night. She said she would have Mrs. Green prepare dinner for his return. They stood in the kitchen like a perfectly normal married couple discussing a perfectly normal trip. He noticed the small things now. The way her eyes moved to his briefcase, then to his phone, then back to his face. The way she asked no extra questions, like someone who already knew exactly what was going to happen next. Travel safe, she said. He nodded and walked out the door. But instead of walking toward the front gate, he turned toward the garden. Martin was already there, standing near the greenhouse pretending to examine the rose bushes. Two unmarked police vehicles were positioned at intervals along the route the car would take. The actual driver, Daniel's real driver of 3 years, was part of the operation now. The man who would show up at the gate would be one of theirs. Follow the plan exactly, Martin said. No improvising. I built a company from nothing, Daniel said. I can follow a plan. He walked to the stone wall where the girl was sitting, notebook on her knees. "Today is the day," he said quietly. She looked up at him with those steady, unhurried eyes. "The fox comes back," she said. He almost smiled. "Yes. The fox comes back." She looked at his suitcase. "Are you really going to the airport?" "Yes," he said. "But not the way they think." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said simply, "Be careful." "I will," he said. At exactly 9 o'clock, the black sedan appeared at the gate. Daniel walked through the front door. Elizabeth was standing near the entrance. She kissed his cheek lightly. He said he would call when he landed. She said travel safe again. For a brief moment they were very close, close enough that if none of this had happened, if he had never heard that recording or stood behind those bushes, this moment would have felt entirely ordinary. That was the part that stayed with him longest. Not the betrayal itself. The ordinariness of it. He picked up his suitcase and walked toward the car. The driver opened the rear door, with his right hand. Daniel got in. For the first 10 minutes, everything was as expected. The road was familiar. Traffic was light. The driver said nothing. Daniel sent a single message to Martin. "I'm in the car." 3 dots appeared almost immediately. "We see you." He put the phone away and watched the road. They passed the turn for the highway. Then 5 minutes later, the car did not take the airport exit. It continued straight, onto a quieter road that led away from the city, toward an industrial area of old warehouses and empty lots and long chain-link fences. "Sir," the driver said. "There's traffic on the main road. This route is faster." Daniel looked out the window at the empty street ahead. "Yes," he said calmly. "I can see that." The car continued. The buildings grew farther apart. The road narrowed. The signs disappeared. Daniel sat with his hands resting on his briefcase and thought about what the girl had said. They said once you are inside the car, no one will see you again. He had looked at this road. He had understood, in a clear and very cold way, what it would have meant to be here alone, without the police behind him, without Martin, without a plan. He thought about how many times in the past 6 months he had gotten into a car without looking at the plate, without looking at the driver's hands, without looking at anything except the screen of his phone. He had been a man moving through his own life at high speed, never stopping long enough to notice what was standing directly in front of him. He allowed himself to feel that, just for a moment. Then he set it aside. When a white metal gate appeared at the end of the road, sliding open with a grinding sound, Daniel spoke. "Before you drive in there," he said quietly, "you should know something." The driver's hands tightened on the wheel. "There are 2 unmarked police cars behind us. 1 more at the end of this road. The man who hired you is already being watched." He leaned slightly forward. "You were paid in cash. That's why they chose you. No records. Used a man with a license and a debt problem." He let that sit for a moment. "And do you know what happens to the man who drives the car when everyone else starts making deals?" Silence. "The driver goes to prison." "They said nobody would get hurt," the driver said finally. His voice was thin. "They said we just had to keep you somewhere for a few days." "That's still kidnapping," Daniel said. The car had rolled to a stop in front of the open gate. Neither man moved. In the distance, a dark vehicle appeared at the far end of the road and began driving slowly toward them. The driver stared at it. "Is that the police?" "Yes," Daniel said. The driver's hands were shaking now. He looked at the open gate. He looked at the car approaching. He looked at the empty building beyond the fence, the place that had been prepared, the place that had been ready. Then he put the car in reverse. Slowly, the sedan rolled backwards, away from the gate, away from the plan, away from everything that had been designed to erase a man's life. 2 police vehicles closed in from both sides. The road went quiet. The engine idled. Daniel Whitmore sat in the back seat, breathing slowly, and thought about a garden. He thought about a girl with a notebook and a pencil, who had noticed that a driver opened a door with the wrong hand. He gave his statement standing outside the car, while a plainclothes detective named Harris listened without interrupting and wrote small careful notes in a notebook. It started in my garden, Daniel said. Because a child heard something she was not supposed to hear. Harris asked only one question when Daniel finished, do you still have the recording? Yes, Daniel said. The girl who made it has it. Her father works for me. Harris nodded once. We'll need it. The rest moved quickly, in the way that things move quickly once the truth has been given a name. Ryan Keller was arrested that afternoon, in the middle of a lunch he never finished. Phone records, bank transfers, the recording from the greenhouse, piece by piece, the picture filled itself in. The truth is faster than deception when someone finally decides to look for it. The last part happened at the house that evening. Daniel came home to find Elizabeth in the sitting room, a book open in her lap, a cup of tea on the side table. She looked up when he walked in. She took one look at his face. And she knew. The book stayed open. The tea stayed warm. She said nothing for a long time. So it's over, she said finally. Yes, he said. She was quiet again. Then, I gave you 15 years. I know. Do you? Her voice had a tremor in it now, not of fear, but of something older. Do you know what it was like? Living in this house alone. Eating dinner alone. Going to every event, every function, every charity gala by myself, while you were on a plane, or in a meeting, or just, somewhere else. Always somewhere else. She looked at the table. I waited when you said things would slow down. I waited when you said next year. Next year never came, Daniel. I did not argue with her. I listened. When you left, he said finally, why did it have to be this way? Why couldn't you just walk out the door? She looked at him then, and her answer was honest in a way that made it harder to hear, not easier. Because if I left, I would fight for years in a courtroom for half of what I helped you build, and maybe not even get that. But if you disappeared, everything came to me quietly. A pause. Ryan showed me the numbers. Ryan showed me the policy. Ryan showed me that 15 years of my life had a very clean solution. Daniel looked at her for a long time. She wasn't talking like a woman who had suddenly turned wicked. She was talking like a woman who had spent years in a quiet room convincing herself, one small step at a time, that this was the only door left. Resentment was like that. It didn't announce itself. It built quietly, in the gaps between missed dinners and cancelled plans and promises that never quite materialized. And then one day it had a name. And a shape. And someone like Ryan Keller appeared, with a spreadsheet and a very clean solution. He looked at her. He looked at the woman he had stood beside for 15 years. The woman who had been in the front row of every public photograph. The woman who had known his schedule better than he had. He tried to find something in her face that explained all of it. He did not find it. He almost felt sorry for her. Almost. A knock came at the front door. Daniel opened it. Detective Harris stood on the step, badge in hand, 2 officers behind him. Elizabeth closed her eyes when she heard his name. She did not argue. She did not run. She simply stood, and when the handcuffs went on, she turned and looked at Daniel one last time. I did love you once, she said quietly. He looked at her for a long moment before answering. I know, he said. That's what makes this so hard to understand. After the police car disappeared down the long driveway, the house fell into a new kind of quiet. Daniel stood in the living room for a while. Elizabeth's book was still open on the table. Her cup of tea was still slightly warm. Everything looked like she had just stepped out and would be back in a moment. But he knew she would not be back. Not to this room. Not to this laugh. He walked out the back door into the garden. The late afternoon sun was pulling long shadows across the grass. The air smelled of soil and leaves and things that had been carefully tended. The gardener was near the far fence, putting his tools away. He straightened when he saw Daniel. "You don't have to call me sir all the time," Daniel said quietly. The gardener gave a small nod and said nothing. He did not know what else to call him. So he kept working. Daniel looked toward the stone wall near the rose garden. She was there, as she always was, her notebook open, her pencil moving in small careful lines. She looked up when he walked toward her. But she did not speak. She waited. He sat down beside her. For a while, neither of them said anything. The light moved slowly across the garden. A breeze went through the upper branches of the oak trees. "What are you drawing?" he asked finally. She turned the notebook so he could see. It was the greenhouse. The glass walls, the door, the two tall trees on either side, and inside, just barely visible, two small figures standing close together. "So I don't forget," she said. Daniel looked at the drawing for a long time. "You saved my life," he said. She looked back down at the paper. "I just told you what I heard." "A lot of people hear things," he said, "and stay quiet. A lot of people see things and look away. You didn't." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, the way she often said things, like she was quoting someone she trusted, "My dad says, if you see something bad and you stay quiet, then a little bit of the bad becomes yours, though." Daniel nodded slowly. "Your dad is a very wise man." He reached into his jacket pocket and took out a small envelope. She looked at it but did not reach for it. "What is it?" she asked. "Something for your future," he said. "For school. For anything you want to become." He held it out. "Take it." She shook her head. "I didn't do it for money." "I know," he said gently. He took her hand and closed her fingers around the envelope. "That's exactly why you deserve it. This is not payment. This is me making sure that someone who tells the truth and does the right thing has more choices in life. Choices are important. You will understand that better later." She looked at the envelope. She did not argue this time. He leaned back slightly and looked out across the garden, at the greenhouse, at the long driveway, at the gate where a car had once waited with a wrong plate and a wrong hand. "Can I tell you something?" he said. She nodded. "You changed something in me this week." He said it slowly, like each word had weight. "I built my whole life thinking success meant money, buildings, contracts, schedules, and the size of my name on the side of a tower. But this week, I learned that success might be something much simpler." "Like what?" she asked. "Like being the kind of person who notices when something is wrong," he said. "And being brave enough to say something, even when it would have been easier not to." She thought about that for a long moment. "My dad says doing the right thing is usually the hard thing," she said. Daniel nodded. "Yes," he said. "It usually is." 3 months later, the Whitmore estate was quieter in a different way. Not empty. Used change. Daniel had moved part of his office closer to home. He attended board meetings by video more often. He delegated more. He had started eating breakfast in the kitchen instead of at his desk. He had started walking the garden in the mornings before his calls began. Small changes. But to a man who had lived entirely inside a schedule for 2 decades, small changes were revolutions. For the first time in 20 years, he had begun to understand that if a company could not function for a few days without him, then he had not built a company. He had built a cage. The legal case moved steadily through the courts. Ryan Keller was charged with conspiracy, kidnapping, and insurance fraud. The driver had made a deal and testified. The greenhouse recording had become key evidence, along with bank records, hotel entries, and phone messages that told the full story with a precision that lawyers on Elizabeth's side could not argue around. The truth, once recorded in a person's own voice, is a very difficult thing to deny. Elizabeth had hired very good lawyers. It did not matter. Daniel went to the first court session. He sat on one side of the room and watched the woman he had shared 15 years of his life with sit on the other side, as a defendant. He did not go back. Some endings do not need to be witnessed more than once. On a Saturday morning in early autumn, he walked into the garden with a cup of coffee. The leaves had just started to turn red and gold at their edges. The gardener was repairing the wooden bench near the rose garden, unhurried and precise. "You've been taking care of this place for a long time," Daniel said. "Yes," the gardener replied. "I used to think I owned it," Daniel said quietly. "Now I think I was just the person who slept here and stored his suits here, while you were the one actually taking care of it." The gardener looked up briefly, then back down at the bench. "A house needs people who are there," he said. "Not just people who pay for it." Daniel nodded. "I'm starting to understand that." He walked toward the stone wall. She was there. She was always there. But today, beside her notebook, there were school books too. New ones. Mathematics. History. Reading. Comprensión. He sat down next to her. "History is important," he said, nodding at the textbook. "My teacher says history is mostly about people making bad decisions," she replied. He laughed quietly. It was a real laugh, not the polished laugh of a man at a business function. A quieter, more honest sound. "Your teacher is probably right," he said. She closed the book. "Are you going to travel again?" "Sometimes," he said. "Not all the time." He looked out across the garden, then back at her. "Do you remember the first thing you said to me? That morning, by the front door?" She nodded. "I told you to stay quiet and follow me." "That was the moment my life changed," he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You could have not listened." "Yes," he said. "I could have. And if I hadn't, I wouldn't be sitting here right now." They sat in the silence of the garden while the wind moved slowly through the trees. After a while, he reached into his jacket pocket and brought out a small set of keys. He held them for a moment, then placed them in her hand. She looked at them, confused. "The greenhouse," he said. "From now on, that's your place. Plant whatever you want. Flowers. Vegetables. Anything. It's yours to take care of." Her eyes went wide. "Really?" "Yes," he said. "Because that greenhouse is where you heard the truth. And sometimes the place where you first hear the truth is the place where something new begins." She held the keys carefully in both hands, like something that could be damaged if you weren't paying attention. "Thank you," she said. Daniel stood up slowly and looked across the garden one more time. 3 months ago, he had been about to disappear from the world without anyone knowing why. Without anyone understanding what had happened to him. He would have been a man who simply didn't come home one day, a case for lawyers and insurance adjusters and a detective with a small notebook. Instead, he was here. Alive. Standing in a garden on a quiet Saturday morning, with a clear conscience and the sun on his face, and a small girl holding a set of greenhouse keys like they were the most important thing she had ever been given. Success was not the size of your house. It was not the number of people who worked for you. It was not the balance in your accounts, or the square footage of your offices, or the number of countries where people knew your name. Success was being alive, to sit in a garden on a quiet morning, and look back at the choices you made, without flinching. Daniel Whitmore walked slowly back toward the house. Not as a man who had everything. As a man who had almost lost everything, and because of that, had finally learned what actually mattered. The roses along the path were still blooming. The greenhouse caught the morning light and held it in its glass walls like something worth keeping. And on the stone wall near the rose garden, a girl opened her notebook to a fresh page and began to draw. Some dangers do not announce themselves. They live quietly inside the routines we trust. The lesson this story carries is not complicated. Pay attention to the small signs. Never silence what you know to be wrong. And never underestimate the courage of someone who has nothing to lose except their integrity. In the end, the truth does not care who carries it. It only cares that someone does.